378. That's how many high-risk hostage extractions Claire Davidson successfully led as a Delta Force commander before she traded her combat gear for work boots, becoming a widowed farmer tending to the peaceful acres of Pine Valley Ranch in Clearwater County. When the Red Skull Brotherhood motorcycle gang rolled into her quiet corner of Idaho, they saw what everyone else saw: just another struggling widow trying to keep her husband's legacy alive. They should have noticed how the farm's security cameras were positioned with military precision, how her daily routines never varied, how her eyes constantly tracked exits and entrances, even while selling organic honey at the local farmers' market. Their mistake wasn't threatening her land. Their mistake wasn't even mocking her late husband's memory. Their mistake was giving a former Delta Force operative who'd rescued hostages across 5 continents a reason to dust off her tactical gear again. In Pine Valley, some battles aren't won by those with the most muscle, but by those who've spent 25 years learning how to outsmart predators who never see the trap until it's too late. The autumn morning painted Clearwater County in shades of amber and gold as Claire Davidson checked the perimeter sensors along her eastern fence line. Her calloused hands moved with practiced efficiency, testing each device with the same precision she once used to check her team's equipment before high-stakes missions. The morning fog still clung to the apple orchard stretching toward Thunder Mountain, but she'd already been up for hours, maintaining her strict routine, a habit 25 years of special operations had burned into her soul. "Aunt Claire," Michael's voice carried across the misty field. Her 16-year-old nephew ran toward her, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. She'd taken him in after her husband's passing, along with his younger sister Emma. They weren't her blood, but they were her family now, just as surely as her Delta Force teams had been. "Mrs. Peterson from the general store called," Michael said between breaths. "Says there were some bikers at the diner last night. They were asking questions about the ranch." Claire's expression remained neutral, but her mind instantly shifted into tactical assessment mode. What kind of questions? About who owns it since Uncle Jack passed? About the mortgage payments? About whether you've been struggling to keep up with the bank? Emma appeared from behind the barn, their Australian cattle dog scout at her heels. At 12, she was already showing signs of the same sharp observation skills Claire had spent years honing. "Scout's been acting weird since sunrise," Emma reported. "Like when those coyotes were stalking the sheep last month, but different." Claire knelt to scratch behind Scout's ears, noting the dog's unusual alertness. The animal had been a gift from her late husband Jack, a local deputy who'd understood her need for constant vigilance, even after leaving the service. He'd joked that Scout would help her transition from watching over hostages to watching over livestock. Now, 3 years after losing Jack to a heart attack, both the dog and the ranch had become her new mission. "I need to head into town," Claire told the kids, her mind already formulating contingency plans. "Michael, check all the cameras. Emma, you and Scout do a full sweep of the outer buildings. Remember the patterns I taught you." "The figure 8. Route with randomized timing," Emma recited proudly. "Never the same path twice. Maintain sight lines to at least 2 exit routes at all times." Claire allowed herself a small smile. The kids had initially thought her security protocols were just the odd habits of their ex-military aunt. Now they treated them like a game, not realizing they were learning the same observation skills she'd used to keep her teams alive in combat zones worldwide. Davidson's general store sat at Clearwater's main intersection, a century-old building that had weathered economic downturns and changing times through sheer, stubborn persistence, much like the community itself. Thomas Peterson looked up as Claire entered, his worried expression confirming her suspicions. "Heard you had some visitors last night," Claire said casually, though her eyes were already mapping defensive positions and exit routes. Another habit she couldn't shake. "Red Skull Brotherhood," Thomas lowered his voice, though the store was empty. They're moving up from Nevada, taking over small towns, small businesses, farms especially, ones having trouble with bank payments since the drought. Claire maintained her relaxed stance, but her tactical mind was already processing. The threat assessment. They've been to other places. Reynolds' place last week. Old man refused their protection offer. Next day his barn caught fire. Faulty wiring, according to the fire marshal. Thomas's tone made it clear what he thought of that explanation. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah Wilson hurried in. Claire's elderly neighbor was one of the few people who seemed to understand there was more to the widow farmer than met the eye. "Claire, you need to see this." Sarah led her outside where a motorcycle cruised past, its rider making no effort to hide his surveillance. The Red Skull Brotherhood patch on his leather cut caught the morning sun, a crimson skull with cruel eyes. "That's the fourth pass this morning," Sarah whispered. "They're watching, just like before the Reynolds fire." Claire squeezed Sarah's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about me, but if you're ever in town when Michael and Emma are here alone—" "Of course, dear." Sarah's knowing look made Claire wonder, not for the first time, how much the observant older woman had figured out, "though I suspect you can handle yourself better than anyone knows." Back at the ranch, Claire found Michael and Emma completing their assigned tasks with the same precision she'd once demanded from her Delta Force teams. Her nephew's tense posture showed he'd spotted the surveillance motorcycle too. "Aunt Claire," Emma started hesitantly, "are we in trouble because of the mortgage? Since Dad—" Claire pulled both children close, breathing in the scent of apple orchards and hay that had replaced gunpowder and sand in her life. "No one's taking this ranch. Your father built something special here, and we're going to protect it." "But those men," Michael began. "Some people think intimidation equals strength," Claire interrupted gently. "Real power comes from protecting what matters, not threatening others." She sent them inside to start their homework, then walked the property's perimeter. Her trained eyes spotted 4 more surveillance positions where bikers had watched the ranch. Their boot prints showed tactical positioning. These weren't just common thugs. In the barn, Claire moved aside a false panel she'd installed behind the tractor. The hidden compartment contained everything she'd hoped to never use again. Her modified tactical gear, close-quarters combat equipment, and enough supplies to run a sophisticated counter-surveillance operation. She'd built this cache the day after Jack's funeral, praying her old life would never intersect with her new one. The rumble of approaching motorcycles carried across the valley. Claire quickly sealed the compartment and emerged from the barn. 4 bikes roared past her property, their riders watching openly now. She recognized their patches from Thomas's description. Red Skull Brotherhood, the most violent outlaw gang in 3 states. The lead rider, a massive man with a broken nose and butcher stitched on his cut, slowed to a stop. "Nice place you got here, little lady." Butcher's cold smile carried clear threat. "Shame if something happened to it." Claire met his gaze calmly. Her stance relaxed but balanced for instant action. "Private property, best move along." Just being neighborly. Times are hard for small farms, especially ones run by grieving widows. Banks get impatient, accidents happen. But we look after our friends, provide protection for a reasonable fee. Not interested. Butcher's expression hardened. Everyone's interested eventually. Ask Reynolds how refusing worked out for him. They roared away in a cloud of dust. But Claire knew this was just the beginning. She watched them disappear around the bend, her mind already formulating plans. The Red Skull Brotherhood thought they'd found an easy target, a struggling widow they could intimidate and destroy. They had no idea they'd just threatened someone who'd spent decades learning how to eliminate threats exactly like them. Claire had left that life behind for her family, built something peaceful. But if the Red Skulls forced her hand, they'd learn why some predators are better at hiding in plain sight than others. Inside the farmhouse, Claire found Emma watching through the window as Scout patrolled the perimeter. the dog's behavior mirroring her own heightened alertness. "Are the bad men coming back?" Emma asked, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. Claire hugged her niece close, remembering the promise she'd made at Jack's funeral to protect his children as fiercely as she'd once protected hostages in war-torn countries. "Don't worry about them, sweetheart. Aunt Claire's got everything under control." But as evening fell over Pine Valley Ranch, more motorcycles passed on the distant road. Claire counted 8 different riders conducting surveillance, their patterns suggesting professional training. The Red Skull Brotherhood wasn't just a gang of thugs. They were organized, experienced, and used to getting their way through fear and intimidation. After getting the kids settled for bed, Claire sat on the wraparound porch cleaning her compound bow, the legal one she kept for deer season, not the tactical gear hidden in the barn. The familiar motion of maintaining equipment helped her think, just as it had during mission planning in her Delta Force days. Tomorrow she'd drive into town, talk to Sheriff Martinez, try handling this through proper channels. But as she watched more bikes pass in the growing darkness, she knew peaceful solutions were becoming less likely. The Red Skulls were about to learn that some threats shouldn't be judged by their appearance. Some battles aren't won by those with the most muscle, but by those who've spent decades learning patience, precision, and the art of turning predators into prey. Sheriff Elena Martinez's office smelled of coffee and leather, its walls lined with community service awards and family photos. The veteran law enforcement officer listened intently as Claire detailed the Red Skull's visits, her weathered face growing darker with each detail. "Same pattern as Cedar Grove and Millbrook," she said. "Finally, they move in slow, target-vulnerable properties. By the time people realize what's happening, they own half the county." "I'm not selling," Claire stated firmly, "but I'd rather handle this legally first." Martinez sighed. "I'll increase patrols, but I'm short-staffed since the budget cuts. And these guys, they're smart, never leave enough evidence for charges." The Clearwater Diner's breakfast crowd fell silent as 3 Red Skull motorcycles pulled up outside. Claire watched through the window as Butcher dismounted, followed by his lieutenants, a lean man with a snake tattoo on his neck called Viper, and a muscular enforcer everyone knew as Tank. They'd chosen their moment well. She'd just dropped Michael off at school. "Well, look who it is." Butcher slid into the booth across from her. "Thought about our offer?" Still not interested. Claire sipped her coffee calmly. 10 grand a month keeps your ranch safe." Viper leaned against the booth. "Cheap compared to rebuilding after a fire." "Is threatening widows and orphans how you usually start your morning?" A new voice carried across the diner. Marcus Chen, the local mechanic, moved with the distinctive gait of someone who'd seen combat, his prosthetic arm a reminder of his service in Afghanistan. "Stay out of this," Tank growled. Claire caught the nearly imperceptible shift in Marcus's stance, a fighter's preparation for action. She spoke before things escalated. "We're done here. I have work to do." She stood, but Tank grabbed her wrist. What happened next was too fast for most observers to follow. Claire simply moved, using his own grip against him. Suddenly Tank was seated again, nursing an arm that was bent at an uncomfortable angle. "Don't touch me again," she said quietly. Then walked out. Dr. Rachel Torres arrived that afternoon to check on a pregnant mare. The veterinarian worked efficiently, but Claire noticed her studying the fresh motorcycle tracks near the barn. "Heard about the diner," Rachel said casually. "That joint lock you used looked like advanced close-quarters combat training." "Self-defense. Class at the community center." Rachel's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Must have been some class. My sister was Delta Force. She used similar techniques." Their conversation was interrupted by Scout's warning bark. 2 Red Skull bikes circled the property, their riders carrying suspicious objects. "Get inside," Claire instructed Rachel, already moving. She reached the fence line just as one rider, prepared to throw what looked like a Molotov cocktail. Her warning shot with the compound bow struck dirt near their bikes. The riders swerved, dropping their weapons, which shattered harmlessly in the field. "Next one won't miss," she called out. The bikes roared away, but she knew they'd be back. Rachel emerged from the barn. "Self-defense class teach you to shoot like that too?" Lucky shot. "Right." Rachel packed her medical bag. "You know, my sister runs a veteran support group in town, if you ever want to talk about self-defense classes." That evening, Claire found Emma practicing with her gymnastics ribbons behind the barn. Her niece's movements carried focused determination. "Those men at the diner," Emma said without stopping. "They're not going to leave us alone, are they?" "No, honey, but we're not leaving either." "I'm not scared." Emma performed a perfect spiral with her ribbon. "I saw how you handled that guy like it was nothing. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones making threats." Claire watched her niece's graceful practice. "They're the ones protecting what matters." "Is that what you did? Before you came to live with us?" Before Claire could answer, scouts. Bark warned of approaching vehicles. Multiple motorcycles stopped at their gate, Butcher himself dismounting with Viper and Tank flanking him. "Last chance," Butcher called out. 20 grand a month now. Price goes up every time we have to ask." Again, Claire positioned herself between the bikers and Emma. "You're trespassing. Leave. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Butcher's scarred face twisted. "Roads aren't safe for kids these days. School buses have accidents." Claire's voice carried deadly quiet. "Threatening children is the last mistake you'll ever make." Something in her tone made Tank step back. Even Butcher's confidence wavered briefly. "Think it over," he said finally. "Tomorrow's deadline. After that, we stop being nice." As the bikes roared away, Claire heard Marcus Chen's truck approaching. The veteran mechanic pulled up, his prosthetic arm glinting in the fading light, his expression grim. "Saw them heading." "This way," Marcus said, climbing down from his truck. "Thought you might want some company." "Thanks, but I can handle them. No doubt about that." He studied her stance. "You know, the way you move, the way you handle yourself, reminds me of some operators I worked with. Delta Force types?" Claire met his knowing look. "Just a farmer protecting her land." Marcus nodded slowly. "Well, this farmer might want to know that Butcher's crew is moving in heavy tonight. 50 bikes at least, coming up from their compound. In Snake River Canyon, word is they're done negotiating." Scout's bark caught their attention. More motorcycles passed on the distant road, their riders conducting surveillance with military precision. The Red Skull Brotherhood was done playing games. Claire watched them disappear into the gathering dusk. She tried handling this legally, tried protecting her cover, but as she counted the increasing number of bikes circling her property like vultures, she knew tomorrow would bring hard choices. Some battles can't be won through peaceful means. Sometimes protecting what you love means becoming what you left behind. The Red Skulls thought numbers and intimidation guaranteed victory. Inside the house, Michael was helping Emma with her homework, trying to maintain normalcy despite the tension. Claire watched them through the kitchen window, remembering how Jack had always said family was worth any sacrifice. He'd understood what she was, what she could do, and still chose to build a life with her. "Aunt Claire," Michael called out, his voice steady despite his obvious concern. "I saw their bikes from upstairs. There's more of them now, and they're carrying something, weapons, I think." Claire checked her phone, multiple missed calls from Sheriff Martinez. The local police scanner crackled with reports of Red Skull, movements throughout the county. They weren't just targeting her ranch anymore. This was a show of force meant to intimidate the entire community. "Mrs. Wilson called," Emma added, looking up from her math textbook. "She says they're stopping people on the main road, checking vehicles, like they own the county already." Claire's tactical mind processed this information. The Red Skulls were establishing control points, cutting off potential support, isolating their targets, standard insurgency tactics. Somebody in their organization had military training. Marcus's truck headlights swept across the yard as he returned, this time with Rachel Torres beside him. The veterinarian carried her medical bag, but Claire suspected it contained more than just animal medicines. "They've got checkpoints on every major road," Marcus reported, his prosthetic arm gleaming in the porch light. "4 of their guys just roughed up old man Peterson at the general store. Sheriff Martinez tried to intervene, but they outnumber her deputies 5-1. Rachel set her bag on the kitchen counter. "My sister's veteran group is ready to help, but most of them are outside the blockade. The Red Skulls planned this well. They're isolating potential resistance before making their big move." Claire watched another group of bikes pass the ranch. Their riders more confident now, more aggressive. They were establishing dominance, showing that they could come and go as they pleased. In their minds, they'd already won. "Michael, Emma," she called her niece and nephew to the kitchen. "Remember those emergency drills we practiced? The ones you thought were just your crazy aunt being paranoid?" Both children nodded, their faces showing the same determination she'd seen in young recruits before high-risk missions. "Tonight's not a drill. When I give the signal, you take the hidden trail behind the apple orchard. Mrs. Wilson is expecting you." "Scout goes with you. We're not leaving you," Michael protested, showing the same stubborn loyalty his father had. "You're not leaving," Claire corrected gently. "You're following tactical procedure. Sometimes the best way to protect your team is to make sure they're clear of the combat zone." Emma hugged her tightly. "We know what you are, Aunt Claire. Dad told us before he died, said you were a hero, but the kind that works in shadows." Claire felt tears threatening. Jack had understood her so well, had even prepared his children to understand. "Your father was the real hero. Everything I do is to protect what he built here." More bikes roared past the ranch, their engines like war drums in the gathering darkness. Through her tactical spotting scope, Claire counted weapons, not just the crude chains and bats typical of biker gangs, but military-grade equipment. Someone was bankrolling the Red Skulls, turning them into a private army. "They're setting up firing positions," Marcus observed, his combat experience evident in his assessment. "Those aren't random patrols anymore. That's a tactical perimeter." Rachel checked her phone. "Just lost signal. They're using jammers, professional-grade equipment. This isn't just a gang anymore." "No," Claire agreed, watching another group of bikes establish a blocking position at the far end of her property. "This is an occupation. They're not just trying to take my ranch. They're taking the whole county, starting with the one person they think is their weakest target." Scout's low growl warned of more approaching vehicles. Through her scope, Claire spotted Butcher leading a large formation of bikes toward the ranch, their headlights cutting through the evening mist like an invading army. "Last chance to back out," she told Marcus and Rachel. "This isn't your fight." Marcus adjusted his prosthetic arm. "They made it our fight when they threatened our community. Besides, something tells me you've got more experience at this than you let on." Rachel opened her medical bag, revealing combat medical supplies alongside her veterinary equipment. "My sister didn't just teach me about treating animals. Some skills run in the family." Claire nodded, recognizing the look of people committed to protecting their home. The Red Skulls thought they were about to crush a helpless widow. Instead, they were about to learn why Delta Force operators were considered the most lethal shadows in any war. "Time to remind them," she said quietly, "why some predators are better at hiding in plain sight than others." As night fell over Pine Valley Ranch, Claire Davidson moved through the shadows with the same silent efficiency that had made her one of Delta Force's most lethal operators. She'd shed her farmer's flannel for the tactical gear hidden beneath. The barn, a matte black combat suit, lightweight armor, and a customized helmet with built-in night vision. In the distance, the rumble of motorcycle engines grew louder, an invading army of chrome and steel led by Butcher and his Red Skull lieutenants. They roared up the main drive, headlights cutting through the darkness, engines revving in a display of intimidation. Claire crouched behind the tractor, her M4 carbine held at low ready. She'd modified the weapon herself, a skill learned through endless hours of training and combat. Marcus Chen took position on the barn roof, his own rifle steady despite his prosthetic arm. Rachel Torres crouched behind the generator shed, a 9mm pistol gripped expertly in her hands. The bike stopped in a loose perimeter around the farmhouse, their riders dismounting with the arrogance of those used to taking what they wanted. Butcher swaggered forward, his cruel face illuminated by the porch light. "Last chance, widow," he called out. "Come on out, sign over the property, and we'll let you walk away." Claire spoke into her helmet's comlink, her voice calm and controlled. "Marcus, Rachel, hold positions. Let them make the first move." The D. Red Skulls began to spread out, some moving toward the barn, others circling the house. Tank and Viper, Butcher's enforcers, carried bolt cutters and chains, their intent clear. "Barn team, go." At Claire's signal, Marcus opened fire from the roof, his shots precise and controlled. 2 bikers fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. The others scattered for cover, shouting in confusion. Rachel engaged the group approaching. The generator shed, her pistol barking in the night. Claire recognized the shooting stance of someone with combat medic training. The veterinarian's skills clearly went beyond stitching up animals. Claire herself emerged from behind the tractor, her carbine spitting controlled bursts. She moved fluidly, muscles, memory taking over, each shot finding its mark with ruthless efficiency. This was the dance she knew best, the lethal choreography of close-quarters battle. Butcher's voice rose above the chaos, rage and disbelief warring. In his tone, "Take her down, light the place up." Molotov cocktails arced through the air, shattering against the barn walls. Tongues of flame licked at the old wood, rapidly spreading. Claire cursed under her breath. The structure was too dry, too vulnerable. She'd hoped to keep the battle contained. "Marcus, Rachel, fall back to the house," she ordered through the comlink. "We'll make our stand there." They came together, like a well-drilled fire team, covering each other's movements, laying down, suppressing fire as they bounded back to the farmhouse porch. The Red Skulls attempted to press forward, but Claire's carbine and Marcus's rifle held them at bay, each shot a reminder of why it was foolish to engage Delta Force operators in their own territory. Tank made a desperate lunge toward the porch, a sawed-off shotgun in his hands. Rachel drilled him center mass, her 9mm barking twice. The big biker stumbled and fell, his weapon dropping from nerveless fingers. Butcher's voice cut through the smoke and flame, a ragged bellow of frustrated rage. "Burn it all down! Burn them out!" More Molotovs flew, this time aimed at the house itself. Windows shattered, curtains igniting, hungry flames spreading with terrible speed. The old farmhouse, the home Jack had built for their family, was being consumed before Claire's eyes. She knew she should feel something: anger, grief, despair. But as the fire roared and the bikers circled like jackals, all she felt was a cold, sharp clarity. The icy calm of a mission unfolding, the merciless focus of a predator cornered. They'd taken her husband, threatened her family, and now they were trying to destroy her home. In that moment, as the flames reflected in her night vision, Claire made a choice. She would no longer hide what she was. She would become the thing Butcher and his gang feared most, a Delta Force operative with nothing left to lose. "Marcus, Rachel, we're going to fight our way to the orchard. Use the trees for cover," she said into the comm, her voice eerily calm amid the chaos. "And then we're going to show them what real power looks like." As the farmhouse burned behind them, Claire and her unlikely team of a wounded mechanic and a combat veterinarian melted into the smoke and darkness, weapons ready, eyes hard. The Red Skull Brotherhood had come to take everything from them. But in that moment, as the bikers spread out in pursuit and the night echoed with gunfire, It was the hunters who were about to become the hunted. Claire had spent decades honing her skills, learning to become a lethal shadow, a precision weapon in the nation's darkest battles. And now, on this burning field under an autumn moon, she would remind them all why you should never corner someone who's spent a lifetime learning how to fight when the odds are against them. The Red Skulls wanted a war. Claire and her allies would show them what real warfare looked like, one bullet at a time. The apple orchard became a battlefield, rows of innocent trees transformed into trenches and bunkers as Claire, Marcus and Rachel fought their way through the smoke and shadows. The crackle of gunfire mixed with the roar of motorcycle engines, the shattering of branches and the cries of the wounded. Claire moved like a wraith, her black combat suit blending into the darkness, her M4 carbine an extension of her lethal will. She flowed from tree to tree, picking off the advancing bikers with ruthless precision, each shot a testament to her Delta Force training. Marcus, his prosthetic arm glinting in the firelight, lay down covering fire from behind a fallen log. His rifle barked steadily, keeping the flankers at bay, his face a mask of grim determination. Rachel darted from cover to cover, her 9mm pistol in one hand, her medical bag in the other. She fired, reloaded, then paused to tie a tourniquet around a wounded biker's leg, an act of mercy amid the chaos. Butcher's voice rang out above the din, a harsh bellow of rage and command. "Flush them out! Pin them down!" The Red Skulls pressed forward, some on foot, others roaring through the orchard on their bikes. They fired wildly, more concerned with volume than accuracy, their bullets ripping through leaves and bark. Claire's comm crackled in her ear, Marcus's voice taut with strain. "They're trying to encircle us, push us back toward the burning house." She knew he was right. The bikers were attempting to cut off their escape, herd them into a killing zone. It was a tactic she'd seen before, in the bloody alleyways of Fallujah and the mountain passes of Afghanistan. "We need to break their line," she said, her mind racing through options. "Draw their fire, then flank them hard." Rachel's voice cut in, breathless but determined. "I'll make the run. You two hit them from the sides." Before Claire could protest, the veterinarian was moving, sprinting from cover in a zigzag pattern. Bullets kicked up dirt at her heels, tore through her fluttering lab coat. But Rachel kept running, firing as she went, a one-woman charge into the teeth of the enemy. The Red Skulls turned to face her, their fire intensifying, their shouts rising in a chorus of cruel excitement. And in that moment, Claire and Marcus struck. They came in from the flanks, carbine and rifle roaring, each shot precise and purposeful. Bikers fell, some tumbling from their saddles, others crumpling in the tall grass. The line wavered, then broke, the survivors scattering in confusion. Rachel dove behind an irrigation ditch, breathing hard, her pistol smoking. Well, that got their attention. Claire reloaded smoothly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline singing in her veins. "We need to keep moving. They'll regroup quickly." They pushed deeper into the orchard, the rows of apple trees giving way to the wilder tangle of the back 40. Claire led them to a small rise overlooking a narrow ravine, a defensible position she'd scouted months ago, just in case. As they caught their breath and checked their ammunition, the night came alive with the snarl of engines. The Red Skulls were riding again, circling the orchard like sharks scenting blood. Marcus, his face streaked with soot and sweat, looked to Claire. "What's the play, boss?" She felt a flicker of grim amusement at the title. Boss, leader. It had been a long time since she'd borne that weight, but as she looked at these two unlikely allies, this wounded warrior and fierce healer, she felt the old mantle settling on her shoulders. "We hold the line," she said, her voice calm and certain. "We make them pay for every inch, and we show them what happens when they try to take what's ours." Rachel nodded, reloading her pistol with steady hands. "I've got movement on the left flank, bikes coming in fast." Claire swung her carbine to bear, sighting down the barrel. Hold fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The bikers roared. Out of the darkness, headlights blazing, engines screaming. They came in a wedge formation, Butcher at the point, his face a snarling mask of rage and hate. Claire breathed out, felt the world slow, the familiar icy calm settling over her. This was the moment she'd spent a lifetime preparing for. The crystalline, instant when thought and action became one. Her finger caressed the trigger, a gentle pressure, a lover's touch. The carbine kicked against her shoulder once, twice, 3 times. And then the night erupted in fire and blood. The lead bikes went down, riders catapulted into the air, machines cartwheeling in sprays of sparks. Butcher's mount took a round. Through the engine block, exploded in a gout of flame and shrapnel. The big man disappeared in the maelstrom, his scream lost in the tumult. And then Marcus and Rachel opened up, their weapons joining the symphony of violence. The ravine became a killing field, a gauntlet of lead and fire that the Red Skulls could not pass. They tried, God knows they tried. They came on foot and on bike, they fired wildly and charged recklessly. But each wave broke upon the rock of Claire's will, the relentless precision of her Delta Force training. In the end, as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, it was Butcher who called the retreat. His voice rose above the din, ragged with pain and fury. Fall back, damn you!" The bikers melted into the shadows, their engines fading into the night. And then there was silence, broken only by the crackle of distant flames and the heavy breathing of the defenders. Claire lowered her carbine, the barrel hot in her hands. She looked at Marcus, at Rachel, at these 2 people who had fought beside her, bled with her. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "For everything." Marcus grinned, the expression transforming his haggard face. "Any time, boss. Like I said, you Delta types are a breed apart." Rachel shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "I'm sending you my therapy bill and possibly my dry cleaning." Claire felt an answering smile on her own face, a strange sensation after so long. But it faded quickly as she looked back, toward the smoking ruins of her home, the still-burning fires of her orchard. This was a victory, hard-won and blood-bought. But she knew, with a cold certainty, that it was only the beginning. The Red Skulls had tasted defeat, had felt the sting of her resistance. And men like Butcher, men of violence and cruelty, did not accept defeat gracefully. They would be back, with greater numbers and fiercer weapons. They would seek to destroy her, to shatter this fragile alliance she had forged in the heat of battle. But as Claire stood there, surrounded by the beauty and ruin of Pine Valley Ranch, she made a silent vow. She would not run, would not hide, would not bend. She was Claire Davidson, Delta Force operator, widow, defender, and she would fight for this land, for her family's legacy, for the chance to build something new from the ashes. The war was just beginning, and she would meet it, as she always had, with courage, with skill, and with a warrior's unwavering resolve. The Red Skulls had picked this fight. Claire would be the one to finish it. Dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of Pine Valley Ranch, the soft light a cruel contrast to the night's violence. Claire stood amid the ashes, her tactical gear scorched and battle-worn, her eyes hard as she surveyed the damage. The farmhouse was a blackened skeleton, its windows shattered, its walls crumbling. The barn was a heap of charred timbers, the vehicles and equipment within reduced to twisted metal. The orchard, once a vibrant sea of green and gold, was now a patchwork of fallen trees and scorched earth. But even as she took in the destruction, Claire's mind was already moving, already planning. The Red Skulls had struck hard, but they hadn't broken her. They'd taken her home, but not her will to fight. Marcus limped up beside her, his prosthetic arm hanging awkwardly, damaged in the battle. "What's our next move, boss?" Claire didn't hesitate. "We rebuild, we regroup, and we take the fight to them. Rachel emerged from the smoky haze, her face smudged with soot, her eyes fierce. "I can rally the town, organize resistance. There are more of us than there are of them." Claire nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. "I need intel, where they're based, how many, what kind of weapons. I need to know everything about Butcher and his gang." "I can help with that," a new voice cut in, rough and weary. Sheriff Martinez stepped into view, her uniform torn and bloodied, her face etched with fatigue. "I've been tracking the Red Skulls for months, trying to build a case. I've got files, informants, surveillance." Claire eyed the sheriff warily. "Why come to me now? Why not before?" Martinez met her gaze steadily. "Because before, I thought I could handle it through the system, through the law. But last night showed me that the law isn't enough. Not against men like Butcher." Claire understood. She'd seen it before, in war zones and failed states. The moment when those sworn to uphold order realized that order had already fallen. The moment when they had to choose between the rules and what was right. "All right," she said, making the decision. "We pool our resources, our knowledge. We build a network of resistance, both within the law and outside it. And we take back what's ours." The days that followed were a blur of activity, a clandestine campaign waged in whispers and shadows. Sheriff Martinez provided the intelligence, the insider knowledge of the Red Skull's operations. Rachel rallied the townspeople, organizing them into cells, preparing them to fight, and Claire, with Marcus at her side, began to train them. In secret meetings and hidden camps, she taught them what she knew: how to shoot, how to move, how to think like a soldier. She forged them into a guerrilla army, a force that could strike swiftly and fade away. But even as they prepared, the Red Skulls tightened their grip. They set up roadblocks, enforced curfews, seized property and resources. They ruled through fear and intimidation, and any who resisted were made brutal examples of. It came to a head on a cool autumn evening as Claire and her inner circle met. In a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of the ranch, Sheriff Martinez burst in, her face pale, her hands shaking. "They've taken the town hall," she said, her voice trembling. "Butcher and his top lieutenants. They're holding the mayor and the council. Hostage, demanding surrender." Claire felt a cold fury settle over her, a familiar, icy calm. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The chance to strike a decisive blow. "Then we give them a surrender," she said, her voice hard. "We give them a surrender they'll never forget." The plan was daring, audacious, a high-stakes gamble that would put everything on the line. Claire and her best fighters would infiltrate the town hall, using the hidden tunnels and secret passages that honeycombed the old building. They would strike hard and fast, taking out the Red Skull's leadership in one fell swoop. Meanwhile, Rachel and the townspeople would rise up, striking at the bikers' strongholds, cutting off their escape. And Sheriff Martinez, with those lawmen, still loyal, would seal off the town, preventing any reinforcements from arriving. It was a three-pronged attack, a coordinated assault that would stretch their forces to the limit. But Claire knew they had no choice. This was their chance to break the Red Skull's power, to show that Pine Valley would not kneel. As they prepared, as they checked their weapons and steeled their nerves, Claire looked around at these people, who had become her army, her family. She saw determination in their eyes, courage in their stance. They were ready as they would ever be. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying in the tense silence, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for each other, for our homes, for our way of life. We're fighting to show that we are not prey, not victims. We are survivors, and we will not be broken." There was a murmur of assent, a rising hum of resolve, and then they were moving, slipping into the night, each to their appointed task. Claire led her team through the tunnels, guided by Sheriff Martinez's knowledge. They moved silently, shadows within shadows, until they reached the heart of the town hall. Above them they could hear Butcher's voice, harsh and mocking, threatening and gloating. They could hear the mayor's replies, trembling but defiant, refusing to give in. Claire signaled to her team, a silent command to take position. They fanned out, covering the exits, preparing to strike. And then, with a nod, Claire kicked open the door and strode into the light. She was a figure of vengeance, a warrior goddess. In black tactical gear, her M4 carbine held ready. "Surrender," she said, her voice ringing out clear and hard. "It's over, Butcher." The big man spun, his face contorting with rage and disbelief. His hand reached for his weapon, but Claire was faster. Her carbine barked once, twice, and Butcher fell, his chest blooming red. Around the room, the other red. Skulls were reacting, reaching for their guns. But Claire's team was already in motion, precise and lethal. Gunfire erupted short and sharp, and one by one, the bikers fell. It was over in seconds, a brutal, efficient strike. Claire stood amid the carnage, her weapon smoking, her eyes hard. And then, from outside, there came the sound of more gunfire, of shouts and cries. Rachel and the townspeople had begun their assault, and the night was alive with the sounds of battle. Claire turned to her team, a fierce grin on her face. "Let's finish this," she said, and together they plunged into the fray. The battle for Pine Valley had begun, and Claire Davidson, Delta Force operator turned farmer turned resistance leader, was at its forefront. She had lost much, had sacrificed much, but she had not lost herself. And as she fought, as she led, as she bled, she knew that this was what she was meant for. Not to hide, not to run, but to stand, to fight, to protect. Pine Valley was her home, and she would make it a home for all, a place of safety, of community, of hope. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, she would not fail. For she was Claire Davidson, and she had found her mission once again. The battle for Pine Valley raged through the night, a desperate, brutal struggle fought street by street, house by house. Claire and her team stormed through the town hall, clearing room after room, their weapons blazing in the dark. Outside, Rachel and the townspeople clashed with the Red Skulls, a ragtag army of farmers and shopkeepers, teachers and mechanics. They fought with whatever weapons they could find, hunting rifles and shotguns, axes and pitchforks, their courage and desperation a match for the bikers' cruelty and firepower. Sheriff Martinez and her loyal deputies fought to hold the perimeter, to keep the town sealed off. They set up barricades and checkpoints, turning back the Red Skull's reinforcements, trapping the enemy within the town's borders. And through it all, Claire was a whirlwind of motion, a force of nature in tactical gear. She led charges and directed defenses, rallied the flagging and inspired the fearful. She was everywhere at once, a soldier, a leader, a beacon of hope in the chaos of battle. But the Red Skulls would not go quietly. Even with Butcher fallen, even with their leadership shattered, they fought on with the ferocity of cornered beasts. They counterattacked viciously, seeking to break the townspeople's resolve, to punish them for their defiance. In the heart of the town, in the blood-soaked streets, Claire found herself face to face with Viper, Butcher's second-in-command. The lean, snake-eyed man grinned at her, his teeth flashing in the firelight. "You think you've won," he hissed, circling her like a predator. "You think killing Butcher changes anything. But we are Legion, we are everywhere. Cut off one head, and two more will take its place." Claire didn't respond, didn't engage in banter. She simply raised her carbine and fired, a quick, controlled burst that sent Viper sprawling, his chest a ruined mess. But even as he fell, even as his blood pooled on the asphalt, Claire heard the roar of engines, the thunder of approaching bikes. The Red Skulls had broken through the perimeter, their reinforcements flooding into the town. Claire cursed, realizing the danger. If the bikers united, if they consolidated their forces, all could be lost. The townspeople were tiring, their ammunition running low, their spirits flagging. She made a decision, a desperate gamble. Keying her radio, she called out to Rachel and Sheriff Martinez, to all the resistance cells scattered throughout the town. "Fall back," she ordered, her voice hard and clear over the airwaves. "Fall back. To the school, to the gym. We'll make our stand there." It was a risky move, concentrating their forces, giving up the advantage of dispersal. But Claire knew they needed to unite, to stand together, to have any hope of weathering the coming storm. As the resistance fell back as they converged on the school, the Red Skulls pursued, sensing weakness, scenting blood. They roared through the streets, their bikes screaming, their weapons barking. But as they approached the school, as they swept into the parking lot, they found not a cowering rabble, but a determined army. The townspeople had used the brief respite to regroup, to reinforce their positions. They had barricaded the doors, lined the windows with sharpshooters, rigged the approaches with traps and explosives, and in the center of it all, standing tall and proud, was Claire Davidson. She had shed her tactical gear, standing now in simple jeans and a blood-stained shirt, but in her hands she held her M4 carbine, and in her eyes she held the fire of a warrior's spirit. "This is where we hold them," she called out, her voice ringing across the battleground. "This is where we show them what we're made of. This is where we take back what's ours." A cheer went up from the townspeople, a roar of defiance and determination. And as the Red Skulls charged, as they crashed against the barricades in a tide of chrome and fury, they were met with a wall of fire, a storm of steel and lead. The battle raged for hours, a ceaseless, brutal slugging match. The bikers threw themselves against the defenses, heedless of loss, driven by rage and desperation, and the townspeople met them at every turn, fighting with the courage of those defending hearth and home. Claire was in the thick of it, rallying the defenders, shoring up the weak points. She fought with a savage grace, her carbine an extension of her will, her every move a dance of death. But even as they held the line, even as they exacted a terrible toll on the enemy, Claire could see the tide turning. The Red Skulls were many too fierce, their resources too vast. Slowly, inexorably, they were grinding down the resistance, eroding their strength, sapping their will. It was then, in that darkest hour, that help arrived. Not from the outside, not from some deus ex machina, but from within the town itself. They came from the shadows, from the secret places, the forgotten, the marginalized, the outcasts. They were the homeless, huddled in abandoned buildings, the addicts lurking in back alleys, the lost and the broken, those who had fallen through the cracks of society. They had watched as the Red Skulls took over, as they imposed their brutal rule. They had suffered under their yoke, had been preyed upon and victimized, but they had also seen the resistance, had witnessed the townspeople's brave stand, and in that moment they made a choice. They emerged from the dark places, from the hidden corners, and they took up arms. With makeshift weapons and improvised tactics, they fell upon the Red Skull's rear, striking from unexpected angles, sowing chaos and confusion. It was the tipping point, the moment of truth. Caught between the hammer of the townspeople and the anvil of the forgotten, the Red Skulls wavered, then broke. They fled in disarray, abandoning their bikes, discarding their colors, seeking only to escape the fury of those they had once terrorized. And as the sun rose over Pine Valley, as the smoke of battle cleared, the town stood liberated, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. In the aftermath there was much to do, wounds to tend, damages to repair, a community to rebuild. But as Claire stood among the townspeople, as she looked into their faces, she saw not just pain and loss, but also hope and determination. They had faced the darkness, had stared into the abyss, and they had not flinched. They had stood together, had fought together, and they had triumphed together. Pine Valley had been forged anew in the crucible of conflict, transformed from a collection of individuals into a true community. And at its heart, at its core, was the unbreakable spirit embodied by Claire Davidson. She had come to this place seeking peace, seeking to escape her past. But in the end, she had found something more, a purpose, a mission, a reason to fight. Pine Valley was her home now, and its people were her family. And she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that she would spend the rest of her days fighting for them, protecting them, nurturing the seeds of hope and resilience that had been planted in the dark of night. For she was Claire Davidson, Delta Force, operator, widow, farmer, leader, and she had finally found where she belonged. In the wake of the battle, Pine Valley was a town transformed. The streets that had run red with blood were now filled with the sounds of rebuilding, of healing. The people who had fought so fiercely, who had risked everything to defend their home, now turned their energies to mending what had been broken. Claire walked among them, lending her strength where it was needed, her counsel where it was sought. She helped to clear rubble, to tend to the wounded, to plan for the future. And everywhere she went, she was greeted with smiles, with thanks, with a newfound respect that bordered on reverence. But even as the town began to heal, even as life started to return to a semblance of normalcy, Claire knew that the fight was far from over. The Red Skulls had been defeated, but not destroyed. Butcher and Viper were dead, but their legacy of violence and intimidation lived on, and there were other threats, other dangers lurking in the shadows. The mysterious figure who had bankrolled the Red Skulls, who had provided them with weapons and resources far beyond the means of a simple biker gang. The corrupt officials in the state capital who had turned a blind eye to Pine Valley's plight, who had allowed the cancer of the Red Skulls to grow unchecked. Claire knew that these battles would have to be fought, that the war for Pine Valley's future was only just beginning, but she also knew that she would not have to fight alone. Sheriff Martinez, battered but unbowed, had recommitted herself to the cause of justice. She worked tirelessly to root out the remnants of the Red Skulls, to bring those who had colluded with them to account. She was a changed woman, hardened by the crucible of battle, but also inspired by the courage and resilience of those she served. Rachel, the fierce veterinarian, had taken on the role of healer, of counselor. She tended to the physical and emotional wounds of the townspeople, helping them to process the trauma of what they had endured. But she also served as a conduit of information, a gatherer of intelligence, using her position of trust to keep tabs on the town's enemies. Marcus, the wounded warrior, had found new purpose in the aftermath of the fight. He took on the task of training the townspeople, of teaching them the skills they would need to defend themselves. He turned his mechanical expertise to the task of fortification, of building defenses and safeguards to protect the town from future threats. And then there were the others, the unsung heroes of Pine Valley's resistance. The shopkeepers and farmers, the teachers and tradesmen who had taken up arms in defense of their home. They formed the backbone of the town's new militia, a citizen army ready to respond to any threat. Among them, Claire found a new sense of belonging, a new family forged in the heat of battle. They looked to her for guidance, for leadership, and she gave it freely, sharing the lessons of a lifetime spent in service. But even as she poured herself into the task of rebuilding, even as she worked to secure Pine Valley's future, Claire knew that her own journey was far from over. The ghosts of her past, the wounds she carried, both physical and emotional, still haunted her. In the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, she would find herself gripped by memories, by the faces of those she had lost. Her husband taken too soon by a failing heart, her brothers and sisters in arms, fallen on distant battlefields, the innocence she had failed to save, the burdens she would always carry. And then there were the questions, the doubts that gnawed at her. Was this the life she was meant for? Was she truly at peace, or was she simply trading one war for another? Could she ever find true healing, true wholeness, after a lifetime of violence and loss? These were the battles that Claire fought in the depths of her soul, the enemies she confronted in the silence of her own heart. And they were battles she knew she would have to fight alone. But even in the midst of her inner turmoil, even as she grappled with the weight of her own past, Claire found moments of grace, of unexpected beauty. She found them in the laughter of children playing in the streets, free from fear for the first time in months. She found them in the fields of wheat rippling in the breeze, a golden sea stretching to the horizon. She found them in the quiet, moments of camaraderie with her fellow defenders, in the shared smiles and knowing looks that spoke of bonds forged in the crucible of combat. And slowly, day by day, Claire began to heal. She began to find a new equilibrium, a new sense of purpose. She began to see herself not just as a warrior, but as a builder, a nurturer, a guardian of something precious and fragile. She knew that the road ahead would be long, that the battles would be many. She knew that she would always carry the scars of her past, that the memories of what she had seen and done would never fully fade. But she also knew that she had found something worth fighting for, something worth living for. In Pine Valley, in the people who had become her family, she had found a reason to keep going, to keep striving, to keep hoping. And so, as the days turned to weeks, as the weeks turned to months, Claire Davidson embraced her new role, her new identity. She was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a widow, no longer just a farmer. She was a leader, a protector, a beacon of hope in a world that had known too much darkness. She was a mother to the motherless, a sister to the lost, a friend to the friendless. She was Claire Davidson, and she had finally found her true calling. Not in the heat of battle, not in the rush of combat, but in the quiet work of building, of healing, of nurturing the seeds of a better tomorrow. And as she looked out over the town that had become her home, as she felt the love and respect of the people who had become her family, Claire knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not peace, but purpose. Not an escape from the world, but a reason to engage with it. Not a way to forget her past, but a way to honor it, to use the lessons she had learned in the service of something greater. Pine Valley had given her a new lease on life, a new reason to keep fighting. And she knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul, that she would spend the rest of her days fighting for it, protecting it, nurturing it, for she was Claire Davidson, Delta Force operator, turned farmer, turned leader. And she had finally found her true home, her true family, her true mission. The road ahead would be long, the battles many. But with the strength of her community behind her, with the love and trust of her people to guide her, Claire knew that there was nothing they could not overcome, no challenge they could not meet. Pine Valley had been forged in the fires of adversity, tempered in the heat of battle, and under Claire's leadership it would emerge stronger, more resilient, more united than ever before. A beacon of hope in a troubled world, a shining example of what could be achieved when people stood together, when they fought for something greater than themselves. This was Claire's legacy, her gift to the world. And she would spend the rest of her days nurturing it, protecting it, watching it grow, for she was Claire Davidson, and she had finally found her true calling, her true purpose, her true home, and nothing, not the ghosts of the past, not the challenges of the present, not the uncertainties of the future, could ever take that away from her. She had fought for it, bled for it, sacrificed for it, and now, at long last, it was hers. A life of meaning, of purpose, of belonging, a life worth living, a life worth fighting for. The life of Claire Davidson, leader of Pine Valley, guardian of hope, protector of the innocent, a life that had only just begun. Months turned into years, and Pine Valley flourished under Claire's watchful guidance. The town that had once been a battleground was now a thriving community, a model of resilience and self-sufficiency. The farms that had been scorched by the Red Skull's fury now yielded bountiful harvests, the fields golden with wheat and barley, the orchards heavy with fruit. The businesses that had been shuttered by fear and intimidation now buzzed with activity, the streets lively with commerce and conversation. And at the heart of it all was Claire Davidson, the woman who had become the soul of Pine Valley. She was a constant presence in the town, a guiding hand and a steady voice. She led not from a position of authority, but from a place of service, always putting the needs of her community first. Under her tutelage, Pine Valley's defenses grew stronger, more sophisticated. The citizen militia became a well-oiled machine, trained in tactics and strategy, ready to respond to any threat. The town's infrastructure was hardened, its communications secured, its resources stockpiled. But Claire knew that true strength came not from arms or fortifications, but from the bonds of community, from the ties that bound people together. And so she worked tirelessly to nurture those bonds, to foster a spirit of cooperation and mutual aid. She organized town meetings where everyone had a voice, where decisions were made collectively. She started a community garden where neighbors could come together to plant and tend and harvest, sharing in the fruits of their labor. She established a barter system where skills and goods could be exchanged freely without the need for money, and slowly, gradually, Pine Valley began to thrive in ways that went beyond mere survival. Art and music began to flourish as people found new ways to express themselves, to celebrate their resilience. The town's children, once huddled in fear, now played and laughed and learned, their eyes bright with the promise of a better future. Claire watched it all with a sense of pride, of deep satisfaction. This was what she had fought for, what she had sacrificed for, not just the safety and security of her community, but its soul, its heart. But even as Pine Valley prospered, even as it became a beacon of hope in a troubled world, Claire knew that the fight was far from over. The threats that had once seemed so immediate, the Red Skulls, the corrupt officials, the mysterious figures in the shadows had not disappeared, but simply retreated, regrouping and reorganizing. And new dangers emerged as word of Pine Valley's success began to spread. Other communities, struggling under the weight of their own challenges, began to look to Pine Valley as a model, a template for their own renewal. Some sought to learn from Claire's example, to emulate her leadership and her methods. Others, driven by jealousy or desperation, sought to take what Pine Valley had built to claim it for their own. Claire met each challenge with the same unwavering resolve, the same fierce determination that had carried her through the darkest days of the Red Skull occupation. She forged alliances with like-minded communities, sharing resources and expertise, building a network of mutual support. She dispatched emissaries to troubled towns, offering aid and counsel, showing them the path to a better future. And when the raiders came, when the desperate and the ruthless sought to take by force what they could not build themselves, Claire met them with all the skill and fury of her Delta Force days. She led her militia into battle, outmaneuvering and outfighting the enemy, showing them the true meaning of strength, of courage, of resolve. Through it all, Claire never lost sight of what mattered most, the people of Pine Valley, the community. She had sworn to protect and serve. She knew each of them by name, knew their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. She celebrated with them in times of joy, mourned with them in times of sorrow, stood with them in times of trial, and they loved her for it, with a fierce and abiding loyalty that transcended mere respect or admiration. To them, she was more than just a leader, more than just a protector. She was a symbol, an icon, a living embodiment of the values that had carried them through the darkest of times. Years passed, and Claire's hair began to grey, her face lined with the cares of leadership. But her eyes remained sharp, her spirit undiminished. She had found her purpose, her calling, and she would not rest until Pine Valley was secure, until its future was assured. And then, on a crisp autumn day, a new threat emerged, more insidious than any that had come before. A sickness began to spread through the town, a strange and deadly malady that defied all attempts at treatment. People fell ill by the dozens, struck down by fever and chills, by a wasting weakness that drained the life from their bodies. Claire organized a response with all the speed and efficiency of a military operation. She quarantined the sick, set up field hospitals, dispatched runners to seek help from allied communities. But the sickness spread with terrifying speed, and soon the town was in the grip of a full-blown epidemic. Day and night, Claire worked tirelessly to stem the tide of illness, to care for the sick and comfort the dying. She spent long hours at the bedsides of the afflicted, holding their hands, wiping their brows, whispering words of encouragement and solace. But even her indomitable will, even her fierce determination, could not hold back the tide of death. One by one, the people of Pine Valley fell, succumbing to the sickness that had invaded their homes, their hearts. And Claire, the woman who had faced down warlords and bandits, who had stared death in the face 1,000 times, found herself powerless in the face of this invisible enemy. She watched as her friends, her neighbors, her loved ones slipped away, their lives cut short by a cruel and implacable foe. In the end, it was Rachel, the fierce veterinarian turned healer, who found the key to the epidemic. Through tireless research and experimentation, she developed a treatment, a way to boost the body's natural defenses against the sickness. It was not a cure, but it was a chance, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Claire threw herself into the fight with renewed vigor, working side by side with Rachel to distribute the treatment, to nurse the sick back to health. And slowly, painfully, Pine Valley began to recover, to emerge from the shadow of death. But the cost had been high, the losses staggering. Whole families had been wiped out, entire generations lost to the sickness. The town that had once been so vibrant, so full of life, was now a shadow of its former self, its streets empty, its fields untended. And Claire, the woman who had once been the heart and soul of Pine Valley, found herself broken, shattered by the weight of so much grief, so much loss. She had given everything to her community, had sacrificed her own happiness, her own peace of mind for the greater good. And now, in the aftermath of the epidemic, she found herself wondering if it had all been worth it, if anything could justify the price that had been paid. But even in her darkest moments, even as she grappled with the enormity of her loss, Claire found solace in the resilience of her people, in the unbreakable bonds of community that had carried them through so much. She saw the way they cared for each other, the way they supported and uplifted one another, even in the midst of so much sorrow. And she knew that Pine Valley would survive, that it would rebuild just as it had before. Because the spirit of the town, the heart of the community, was stronger than any sickness, any loss. Claire Davidson had given her life to Pine Valley, had poured her heart and soul into the town and its people. And now, even in the midst of tragedy, she saw the fruits of her labors, the enduring legacy of her leadership. Pine Valley would go on, would thrive and prosper, because of the foundation she had built, the values she had instilled. And though she might not live to see it, though she might not be there to guide and protect her community, she knew that her work, her sacrifice, had not been in vain. For she was Claire Davidson, leader of Pine Valley, mother and sister to all. And her spirit, her courage, her unwavering commitment to the greater good would live on, would endure, would continue to inspire and uplift long after she was gone. That was her legacy, her gift to the world. And it was a gift that would never be forgotten, never be diminished, never fade away. For as long as there was a Pine Valley, as long as there were people who believed in the power of community, in the strength of the human spirit, Claire Davidson would live on, a beacon of hope in a world that so often seemed consumed by darkness, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. Not the battles won or lost, not the accolades or the honors, but the lives touched, the hearts uplifted, the seeds of hope planted and nurtured. That was the true measure of a life well lived, a legacy worth leaving. And it was a legacy that Claire Davidson, leader of Pine Valley, mother and sister to all, would carry with her into whatever lay beyond this mortal coil, for she had lived and loved and fought with every fiber of her being, and that, in the end, was enough. More than enough. Years passed, and Pine Valley slowly healed from the scars of the epidemic. Under Claire's steadfast leadership, the town rebuilt and recovered, brick by brick, life by life. The fields were replanted, the businesses reopened, and laughter began to echo through the streets once more. But for Claire, the wounds ran deep. The losses she had suffered, the grief she carried, were a constant ache in her heart. She threw herself into her work, into the endless tasks of guiding and protecting her community, but the pain never fully abated. She found solace in the quiet moments, watching the sun rise over the misty fields, sharing a cup of coffee with Marcus on the porch of the old farmhouse, listening to the excited chatter of the town's children as they played in the park. It was in these moments that she felt the flicker of hope, the reassurance that life inexorably went on. And yet, even as Pine Valley flourished, Claire could sense that her own journey was nearing its end. She had given so much of herself to this town, to these people, her strength, her courage, her very soul. She knew, with a clarity that was both comforting and sobering, that she had fulfilled her purpose, that she had given all she had to give. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned golden and the air hummed with the promise of change, Claire called a town meeting. They gathered in the community center, the very heart of Pine Valley, young and old, friends and neighbors, all united by the bonds of shared struggle and shared triumph. Claire stood before them, her posture straight, her eyes clear and bright. She looked out at the faces of her community, the people she loved more than life itself, and felt a swell of pride, of gratitude, of deep and abiding affection. "My friends," she began, her voice strong and steady, "my family, you know, better than anyone, the road we have traveled together, the challenges we have faced, the losses we have suffered, the triumphs we have shared. You are the heart and soul of this town, the reason Pine Valley stands strong today." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I am honored to have served as your leader, but I know that Pine Valley's strength comes not from any one person, but from the indomitable spirit of this community. And it is that spirit that will carry you forward, that will guide you through whatever challenges lie ahead." She smiled, a smile tinged with sadness and love. "My journey with you has been the great honor of my life, but I feel it in my bones. It's time for me to step down, to pass the torch to the next generation of leaders. And Pine Valley is in good hands, your hands." There was a moment of silence, then a murmur of emotion, of understanding. Rachel, ever perceptive, stepped forward and took Claire's hand. "You will always be our leader," she said softly, "in spirit, if not in title. Your wisdom, your courage, your love, they are woven into the very fabric of this town. That will never change." Claire felt tears welling in her eyes, tears of gratitude and release. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and looked out once more at the faces of her community. In the days that followed, there were many tears, many words of love and appreciation. Claire spent long hours with her closest friends. Rachel, Marcus, Sheriff Martinez. She walked the streets of Pine Valley, soaking in every detail, every memory, and she made her plans, quiet and unhurried, for the next chapter of her life. At dawn on a misty morning, Claire saddled her horse and rode. Out of town, a lone figure on the horizon. She didn't know where the road would take her, but she knew, with a certainty that filled her heart, that a part of her would always remain here, in this town that had become her home, her family, her very life. As the miles fell away, as Pine Valley receded into the distance, Claire felt a sense of peace, of profound contentment. She had lived a life of meaning, of purpose, of service. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she carried with her the love and strength of an entire community. For she was Claire Davidson, leader of Pine Valley, mother and sister to all. And her legacy, like the very spirit of the town she loved, would endure, would inspire, would light the way for generations to come. The morning sun broke through the mist, casting the world in a golden glow. And Claire, her heart full and her spirit at peace, rode on towards the horizon and the promise of a new dawn. As Claire rode into the unknown, she knew her story in Pine Valley had come to an end. But a new chapter was just beginning. Her legacy would live on through the strength and resilience of the community she had nurtured and protected. Years turned to decades, and Pine Valley thrived, a testament to the unwavering spirit of its people and the indelible mark left by its most beloved leader. The tale of Claire Davidson, the warrior turned guardian, became legend, passed down from generation to generation as a shining example of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable power of the human heart. And though Claire herself faded into memory, her presence could still be felt in every corner of the town she had called home, in the laughter of children playing in the streets, in the gentle sway of the orchards she had tended, in the unbreakable bonds of community that held fast through every trial and triumph. For as long as there was a Pine Valley, as long as there were those who believed in the enduring strength of the human spirit, Claire Davidson would live on, a beacon of hope, a guiding light, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a reason to keep fighting, to keep believing, to keep loving. Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this riveting tale of Claire Davidson and the indomitable spirit of Pine Valley, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of community. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more incredible journeys with you. Thanks for listening.